Bobby, for being here. And I just want to comment about the significance of that holiday to me. The idea that our founding fathers got together and put everything on the line, and recognizing that the unique fact among history at that time was that all of the rights we have, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness being the first and important ones among many others, come from God. God gives us those rights, and mankind doesn't have the power to alienate those rights from us. And what we do is we take all that life, that liberty, that pursuit of happiness, freedom that we have, and we loan part of the government for the public good in a very limited fashion. And we have to remember that at the time. And the idea that we are a nation of law, and we follow the rule of law, that's one of the great strengths of this country. If you look around the world and see what's happening and what's happened in the past, cultures in other countries don't accept the rule of law. They settle things with violence. Whereas when we have problems like we had, for example, in the 2000 election, or with the opposition to the Obamacare legislation, we solve it with the rule of law and the court system. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but we don't take to the streets and act with violence. I think that's a great hallmark of the American culture, that we live by the rule of law and we have these very solid protections in our founding documents for those God-given rights. So let's celebrate those rights tomorrow, and happy birthday, America. I'm going to do a little bit of a PowerPoint here. It might be longer than we have time for. Let me ask you what your expectation on time is, so I don't see that.
As long as everybody's still in the room, then it's probably running over.
Well, I've done this, I think, 10 times, and I can do it in 35 or 40 minutes, but then if people start asking questions along the way, I can get lengthier. So we'll do the best we can, and I will speed it up if I think we're running behind or whatever. Now, how do I work the slides, Andy?
Space bar?
Is that okay, just on the computer there? All right, very well.
You want me to?
If you'd like to, that would be helpful. Sure, we can speed it up a little bit. What I'd like to do is usually I introduce my legislative aide and my district aide when they're here. We don't have them here today. I go right into the 2013 session. And the first thing we have to do every year when we meet for 60 days is mandatory that we pass a balanced budget in Florida, which is great. In the federal government, they don't have any such requirement, and you know what happens there. But here, we have to live within our means. And the revenues this year, in the fiscal year just began, actually 2 days ago, revenue exceeded prior year expenditures. So we didn't have to cut the budget this year. We had a lot of unmet needs we needed to make good on. So the amount of revenue we had is $74.492 billion. It breaks down into three basic categories. General revenue is the sales tax revenue that we collect. Trust funds at the state level are collected for specific purposes and have to be spent for those purposes in general. And the federal trust funds come with strings attached, like Medicaid funding and the federal title funding for the education system and so forth. So we basically break it down. It's roughly 1/3 in each category. You can see the actual numbers there. And the next slide is a pie chart. It shows how that $74.492 billion is spent across the different lines of government. The biggest being healthcare expenditures of almost 42%. That includes the Medicaid program, current Medicaid. The second largest is education at 27.2%, and that included some additional funding, which we'll see in a minute. And the third biggest area is transportation and economic development. Every member of the House, I think almost every member of the House, serves on an appropriations committee or subcommittee. Mine is the Justice Appropriations Subcommittee, so my window into the budget details is from that position on Justice Appropriations. That's the red slice of the pie. We have a big part of government, a lot of employees, because we have Department of Corrections in that jurisdiction, but the actual amount of money is only 5.7% of the overall. And that's the area that I have the most knowledge of to serve on that committee. We do rely heavily on the committee system in the legislature. The speaker has been very good. Every speaker that I know of has been very good drawing on the talents of the members. So, for example, me being a practicing attorney for 30 years now, my best contribution can be on something like justice appropriations or something related with the court system. Other members, like we have some physicians, they serve on healthcare committees. So the talents are very well distributed and drawn upon. Okay. Now, one of the big things we did with the extra revenue was put it into education this year, over $1 billion of new spending. Part of that is for student growth, so it's not real dollars going to new things, it's just covering growth. But we added $480 million for teacher raises that will be broken down. Basically, those ranked effective will be eligible for the $2,500 level raise, and those who are highly effective can get $3,500. The details of that is left to the school districts because they have to bargain with their collective bargaining units. So the micro details were not provided by the legislature, just the amounts and the categories. Okay, education reform. This was a big bill, and Representative Marlene O'Toole, who's chair of the Education Committee, worked on this bill. She did a wonderful job. She also got an A+ in that directory there for Americans for Prosperity. But this bill was intended to address some standards in the education code that were passed in 2010, and it was based on trying to raise academic standards for high school students at that time, but it was basically a one-size-fits-all approach to high school education, meaning let's try to make them take, or let's have them take these college preparatory courses that they're not all going to use in their chosen endeavor. This bill attempts to give alternative pathways for success of our high school students. And the biggest thing I think in it was that it allows the curriculum to be delivered through the pursuit of industry certifications. So instead of just saying you have to take certain science courses or whatever, you could fulfill those requirements by going in an industry certification path. And that's good. And also emphasize digital technological ability, and will just help students meet the needs of the workforce where they can get high-paying jobs if they have those industry certifications. Okay. At the university level, we have universities that are excellent within the state, but they're not able to compete for national rankings because we haven't allowed them to be preeminent. We haven't given them the resources and the flexibility to pursue national standards like the University of Virginia, University of California, Berkeley, that traditionally always rank in the top 25 or in the country. We want UF and FSU to be able to compete at that level. So one of the things we're going to be doing to raise the bar is University of Florida will be able to create a fully online 4-year baccalaureate program that can be delivered completely online anywhere in the world. And that'll be a very good program for kids that want to learn that way. And we're going to have more linking of workforce needs to the education curriculum at the university level as well.
My son graduated from Florida online.
Okay, congratulations. And he got his master's degree recently.
He had to get that at Western Carolina because Florida didn't have one in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I have a note going out to him. I have the envelope on my desk. I want to send it. But I will send it to your business address.
The wave of the future.
Yep, very good. This is a good bill. So if you see Representative O'Toole, she's done a remarkable job, and I have to tell you,
She is.
I mean, I walk by her parking space going into the Capitol in the morning, and her car is there, and I walk out by her car, and I'm going out late. I mean, I'm one of the late stayers, you know, and I'm leaving, and her car is still there. She just works tirelessly. Really, really hard work from a representative and a lot of talent too that she brings to the table. So I just want to mention that to you see her. Okay, this next bill, independent living, a really good bill. The governor signed this in Orlando, I think a week and a half ago. It has to do with foster care. Right now, well, before the bill was signed, the law was that when they hit 18, they have to leave foster care. And we all know from raising our own children that they're not ready for the real world at 18 necessarily. They're mature in many respects a lot of times, but they don't necessarily have all the life skills, especially when they've had difficult beginnings, and that's why they're in foster care in many cases. So this bill said, or basically provides that they can stay in foster care for up to age 21 now, if that's what's going to help them learn to be independent. And there's some additional standards in here. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, increases, no, go back. Yeah, increases the responsibility of foster parents. They have the ability to purchase things, and this is going to increase accountability for their purchases, and also creates a college coaching program for the kids that are in foster care. So it's going to be a game changer for a lot of young people that can stay where they're comfortable until they get the life skills and the independent living skills that they need to be successful. Okay. Texting while driving, this bill's been around for a long time in the legislature, and there was a lot of resistance to just go in a heavy-handed way on it because people need time to adjust to the new rules. So this bill was able to get traction by going with a secondary offense, similar to how the seatbelt law was passed. And that worked because people were able to get used to the idea that you must buckle up. And then eventually it became a primary offense, and everybody's pretty much, most people are complying with that now. So with texting and driving, you can be stopped if the officer sees you violating or he catches you violating some other law, like speeding or swerving or whatever. And if they see that device in your hand as you're driving, you can get another ticket for that. And, they can't get your phone and start searching, looking to see what you were doing unless you're in an accident involving serious personal injury or death. So there is a sort of a higher bar for that. But this will be great because we can actually tell our young people right now, well actually it's October 1st, but texting and driving while driving is illegal. Now, if you're at a traffic light checking your texts or your emails, you're okay, as long as you're stationary. You can still talk on the phone. Ethics is a bill that was a high priority of the leadership in both chambers. This bill passed. It was attempting to clean up some of the things that give the politicians in public service, that they earn a bad reputation for good reason, because some of them have used their office to get cushy jobs in the public sector, and that was allowed. It's going to be harder for that to happen now with this bill. There's a new standard that prevents officials from using their public office as a springboard into public employment. If they, for example, we had a former speaker who ended up having to leave office, and as he assumed the leadership role, he was getting a high-paid position in a public university, I believe. That's the kind of thing that's just a no-no. But if they're a university professor to begin with, and they get elected, they're not going to lose their job. They already had it. Just the idea of getting a job using your public connections. Also, the lobbying ban. A legislator right now can't leave office and immediately lobby the legislature. They have to wait 2 years. But they can immediately lobby the executive branch until this bill passed. Now it's a 2-year prohibition across the board, both legislative and executive branches. So that helps keep the focus on the public good while they're still in office. They're not setting up a lobbying firm perhaps too early or anything like that. Also, the Florida Commission on Ethics can get information from other sources with this bill, not just from sworn citizen complaints, which is where it is before the bill. For example, the state attorney could get information from an informant or from a public complaint that could then be vetted. And if they thought it was legitimate, they might not want to prosecute criminally, but they could still report it to the Commission on Ethics. So there's different alternative ways to get information in front of the Commission, which should bring more accountability to the officials. The elections bill arose out of the problems we saw in 2012, and those problems were largely confined to the southern part of the state, the bigger counties where they had longer lines and delays. And the early voting was, prior to 2011, 14 days, and in 2011 we passed a bill that cut it back to 8. That's a lot of days, though. 8 still is a lot of days, but apparently that didn't work for the bigger, larger populated counties, and so we, in this bill, kept it at a minimum of 8 days, but said to the supervisors of elections, you can go up to 14 days now if you want to with early voting. And we also gave them additional options for where to have the early voting. It was kind of really restricted before, now there's more options there in the bill. We limited the length of constitutional amendments with this bill because we had 12 of them on the ballot last time, and some of the amendments were very lengthy. And this would say we have to limit it to 75 words for the ballot summary. That should be a helpful thing. The other thing I think is just a matter of management. We had a lot of good amendments come one at a time. So you're on the floor there, you're just voting on things one at a time. It's a good, I like this amendment, I'm voting for it. Put it on the ballot, give the voters a shot at it. But when you do that, when you end up with 12 of them, it becomes unmanageable. So we have to be thinking more about not putting too many on at one time, just because we want to make sure that the ones that are on are going to get the proper attention. Because a lot of folks just say, you know what, I'm going to vote no on all of them because it's just too much for me to absorb and understand, and I don't trust them to begin with, so let's just go down on all of them and not worry about it. But I'd rather see voters take them one at a time and vote on them up or down on the policy, and a lot of voters did that, but if we have fewer, it should make it easier to do that. Okay. The economic development bill that had the sales tax holiday is worth mentioning because, of course, a lot of us don't have children in school now, but some of us do. And this will help get them ready for school. August 2nd through 4th, there will be no sales tax due on school supplies under $15, clothing under $75, and for the first time, computer equipment under $750. That should really help families with children out, especially the computer. If you end up buying a $750 computer, that's $50 in sales tax savings that you would get. This is very good for the economy as well. It helps the retailers and the families. Okay. This bill had in it one of the high priorities of Governor Scott on job creation. He's very laser focused on job creation, as you well know. He's doing a great job creating jobs in the state of Florida now, driving the unemployment number way down, even below the national average. And one of his high priorities this session was a sales tax exemption on manufacturing equipment. Governor Scott recognizes the value of Florida in its resources for manufacturing. We have lots of land, we have 14 deep water ports, lots of good airports, lots of opportunities to market to the Central America and South America, among other markets. So he's trying to get more manufacturers to either come to Florida and set up their plants or get the existing ones to expand their plants. And by saying to them, you can do that and not pay sales tax on your equipment, that's an incentive. Other states have done this, so we have to be competitive with them, and this is a way of doing that. Really, really good bill. Okay. Now I'm going to shift gears to the bills that I was working on. I probably mentioned this before when I was here last year, but every House member can file 6 general bills. A general bill is just a proposal for a change in law, either changing what's there to begin with or adding something new or both. And so the way you get these bills filed, first you have to have the idea, and then you have to get into drafting. There's some professional drafters that help you put it in format, proper format, and then you eventually you're satisfied with the way it reads, and you file it, it gets a number, and it goes to the Speaker's office for referrals to committees. And so every bill gets references based on the subject matter of the bill. What does it touch? What does it do? And then it will go to the appropriate committees. And there's a certain sequence you have to follow. You have 2 or 3 committee references, then it has to go to the first committee, then the second, then the third. It has to clear all the committees in order for it to be eligible for consideration on the floor of the House. And the same process occurs in the Senate. You have to have a Senate sponsor, and you have to move forward in both chambers to a successful conclusion on the floor in identical form. And then it would go to the governor if that occurred. So I'm just going to review these bills and tell you a little bit about what I was working on and comment on how they ended up either making it or not making it. First bill, and we'll go through the list with this going on one at a time. There's a slide for each one. This one was the easiest one I did this session, the easiest one I've ever done, and probably the easiest one I ever will do. It's just a name change in the statutes for the Sumter Community College to make it the Sumter State College because it began offering 4-year degrees. Governor Scott signed it like on the 3rd or 4th week of session, probably 4th week, something like that. This one was not such an easy task here, and you all know about this one. We got a lot of emails on this one. This was well, before I ever got into the legislature, Senator Baker ran this bill in the Senate. And that's how I found out about it. So another representative told me about it, and I found out Senator Baker had run it. Filed it in 2011, I didn't get a hearing. I filed it in 2012, and we made it through the committees and the floor of the House, but it didn't get anywhere in the Senate that year. In 2013, filed it the 3rd time, and I got it through the House again after getting through the committees, and then Senator Hayes, who had it all 3 years as well, he was able to get it to the floor of the Senate. But unfortunately, the timing of that floor vote was next to the last day of session. There were some procedural problems with that, and we just have to deal with it as it comes. But what happened was on the Senate floor, it required a 2/3 vote because it was late in session. Had it been a week earlier, it would have been a simple majority. So when Senator Hayes had my bill, which came over from the House and is now on the floor of the Senate on day 59, 25 Republican senators voted for the bill, but it needed 27 votes. One member was out of the chamber, so it was 26 out of 39, so it failed because it needed 20. It was 25 out of 39, I'm sorry, but it needed to get over that hurdle. Either way, we needed at least one more vote. And 14 Senate Democrats all voted against the bill, and that was enough to kill it because there's 40 total senators and 14 Democrats prevents getting to 27 votes, which is what you need for a 2/3 majority. So the bill failed on the vote in the Senate. Now, this is a bill, of course, that discusses the judiciary of Florida. In a family law proceeding, if someone has to apply a foreign judgment or a foreign law to a family law proceeding, you're not allowed to apply that law. If doing so would violate the fundamental liberties, rights, or privileges of that person. There's a whole lot of things that could still occur. If the person didn't object and was fine with it, it was a waiver of that objection, that they could still apply it. So it's only in a situation where you have an actual or foreseeable violation of fundamental constitutional rights of the objecting party that the court would not be able to apply foreign law had this bill passed. So it wasn't this blanket, odorous ban on foreign law that some of the opponents tried to make it out to be. Nevertheless, they were able to marshal 14 Senate Democrats to vote it down, and they did, and that's why it failed. Okay. Powers and duties of district school boards. I know Board Member Miller would find this bill interesting and knows about it because he's talked to me about it many times. But about 7 years ago, maybe, the legislature took away the ability of the school boards to set the opening day of school anytime they want, which they had until that point. That bill said that you can only start school 14 days before Labor Day or later. You can't do it any earlier than that. So in Lake County, our high school students have to go home for their Christmas break and come back in January and finish their fall courses and take their end of course exams like about a week into January or so, a week or week and a half in. So they're not going to do as well on their tests when they have that much vacation time in between. And the other problem is that it disentitles them or disqualifies them for the dual enrollment with the college here, Lake Sumter State College, because that spring semester in early January starts sooner than they'll finish their high school fall term. So there's too much of a gap there, and they can't finish the prerequisites from the fall semester in time to take the college courses in the spring semester. So a whole host of problems from this mandate. And I was trying to say, give the school boards another week. Because if you give them another week, they can make it work. But the bill didn't really move very far. I've done this 3 years in a row. It didn't get heard the first 2 years. I got it to the first committee, and I got a favorable vote in the first committee, but then it died after that. Just too heavy of a lift because there's too many groups that don't want to see the school calendar change because they want the opportunity to have longer summers. So,
Disney is the one.
well, among others. There's a large group of them that just don't want to see this change. And in the favorable vote that I got in the first committee, there were a lot of caveats from the members. And, you know, if you're around there, you know what it means when they say, Representative Metz, thank you for bringing this bill forward. Appreciate you doing that. I'm going to support you today, but I have concerns about the effect this bill would have on the economy. That's telling you, don't count on me to vote for it again. And they're on the other committee, maybe, or certainly they'll be there on the floor. So I'm not sure what we're going to do with this. It's good policy, but it's not likely to succeed the way things stand right now.
Maybe constitutional amendment, do everything else.
Yeah.
Well, we're just trying to cut back on those. And those are heavy lifts too, a 60% requirement. Plus, we don't want to have these micro details in the Constitution. We can avoid it. But this is another bill. I want to tell you about this one here. I filed it for the very first time in 2012, but other members have filed it in the past. This is an oldie but a goodie. It's around town a lot for many years now, but it never gets anywhere. The way that things work now, if you're going to buy professional services, architectural services, engineering, landscape architect, surveying, and mapping, government purchasing agents right now are prohibited from considering price in those determinations. They put a request for qualifications out on the street, the firms respond and give their qualifications, and then a committee is appointed by the school board or the county or whatever the agency is. This is state agencies as well. And they will look at the submissions and they will determine if they're qualified or not. And then of the firms that are qualified, they'll rank them 1 through whatever, and they'll then approve the ranking, and then the procurement officer then can take the number 1 firm and go talk to them about the contract and ask them for their pricing at that time after they've won the competition. The bill would have said, if you like that system, keep using it. You're allowed to. But if you'd like to use an alternative, then you can ask them for the pricing, the qualified firms. We're not dealing with unqualified firms. If they turn in paperwork that shows they're not qualified, they're not qualified. But if they're qualified, you can ask them for their pricing at that time, and then you can compare the qualified firms side by side. And then, giving no more than 50% weighting to the pricing, you can pick your best value at that point. So you can shop and compare on qualifications and price, and then make your determination. Well, guess who's against this bill? the big architectural firms, the big engineering firms that don't have to compete on price right now. And they locked it down. So we never even got a hearing on it. And that's been the case for years. There's a few purchasing agents from around the state that feel strongly about this, and they have told me this bill's been around for actually like decades maybe. It's just been on again, off again, and people try to bring it, and it just never gets anywhere because they're able to lock it down by just defeating it, by not getting it heard in committee or whatever. It doesn't even get voted on. So I'm not sure where we're going with this, but the smaller firms, the local firms, are the ones that support this type of reform. And you hear from them a lot. They say, we're not choosing local firms. We're always going with the big firms in Orlando or Tampa or whatever. Guess what? That's because they win the qualifications contest, and they don't have to compete on price. So the local firms that could do the job well and earn the business on value don't get to compete. And I like the idea of running government like a business. That's one of my principles, and that's why I ran the bill. I'm not sure where we're going with this one either.
This one might be worth an amendment. It's not one my recommend. This would have a huge impact on all municipalities, school boards, and the state, and how much money we spend.
And Jim, you know from your experience exactly how it works. I mean, you don't. Now they will say to you in response that you can ask them for a price after you name the top firm. You say you're the winner. Show me your pricing. You could actually say, well, you know, it doesn't really look like it's a good deal. Can we lower it a little bit? But you're asking them to do that. But you can't say, well, we have another firm that's equally qualified or just the same level of qualification. If they're willing to do it for less, are you willing to, consider that? You can't have that conversation. It's taboo.
Larry.
The argument is we're not going to have qualified engineering firms if we ask them for price. And it's not, by the way, the lowest bidder wins. Because, again, under the bill, you have to be qualified in order to have the discussion. If you're not qualified, you're not going to get to talk about it. You're not going to be asked for your fees. You're going to be deemed unqualified. You're not going to be in the hunt there. But if you're qualified, you have 3 qualified firms, why not, before you pick one, ask them all for their pricing information and go side by side and then give no more than 50% weighting price. That's what the bill would do. It's common sense.
Larry?
It doesn't always prevail.
Bill Mathias on the school board bored into one contract just like this, and it was so lopsided with the overhead costs and everything you read about, maybe read about some of it in the papers, and this was exactly the issue, is that they ended up choosing, because a big company comes in, they spend on marketing and fancy brochures and presentations and everything else, and so then they come across in the ranking system as being the most qualified, and then they're the ones that you have to take. Well, Mathias did find out that you could choose another one, and he asked the school board to, and there's 3 people on that board that would not do that. And so that's the exact situation. So they got one that he had outlined a whole bunch of problems because he has experience with contracting firms.
Right, and the ranking system is something they do control. They can, I think, work that out with their own committee, but they still have to take the qualifications without the pricing information under the current law. And then when they pick the winner, you say, you're the #1 firm, we're going to pick you, and we're going to talk about the contract with you, tell us your pricing at that point. But if you just think about how you buy anything major, a car, a house, color TV, you shop and compare, don't you? I mean, if you're a prudent consumer, you would. Why can't government do that? Okay, we better move on. This is a locally generated bill that Senator Hayes and I worked on for 2 years in a row. I made it through the House with it in 2012, but it didn't make it through the Senate. We brought it back this year, we got it through. Basically, there was a gap in law. On state-owned land, you can't go on that property like Lake Louisa State Park and start digging around looking for artifacts just because you want to. It's state-owned property, you don't own it, you can't go in there and dig. It's against the law. But you could go and get a permit from the Department of State if you were an archaeologist, or you were with, say, the University of Florida Department of Archaeology, you wanted to do a dig, you can still do that. There's a way to get a permit. But you can't just go out there as a rogue digger and look for artifacts so you can get arrested. But for property owned by an independent district like the Lake County Water Authority, there is no such protection, nor does that agency have the ability to pass an ordinance, because it's not really a general government like a county commission is. So we took the current law that's there for the state-owned lands and we applied it to water authorities and defined those water authorities to include the Lake County Water Authority. So the governor signed this bill maybe a couple of weeks ago, and it's now law, and so the Lake County Water Authority properties are protected now from looting. Okay. Expert testimony. This arises out of my expertise as an attorney. This is an important bill because we have in Florida, the first bullet point says it places prize standard in Delaware. This has to do with the standards that judges apply when experts want to come into court and testify. And this happens a lot in civil and criminal cases. You can recall perhaps the Casey Anthony trial where in that criminal case, they wanted to bring an expert in who could say that an odor captured in a trunk of a car was human decomposition. That's just the kind of stuff that experts come up with when they want to come in and testify. And the law that exists before this bill passed was the prize standard. It's 1923 federal court decision that said the standard for determining whether to allow an expert to testify is whether the testimony, the opinion testimony, is generally accepted in the field from which that expert comes. General acceptance as the sole criterion is pretty loose because you can have people come in and bolster an expert and say, yeah, it's generally accepted. And if you have two experts that are saying it's generally accepted and they're battling, the judge will just let them go in front of the jury and have the battle of the experts play out. There's no real standard for determining what was scientifically valid. But in the federal court system in 1993, in a case called Daubert, the U.S. Supreme Court adopted a more stringent standard, and that applies in all federal courts, and since that time, 28 other states adopted that as their standard. And not a single state changed from Pride to Delaware and went back. They all kept it where it was once they made the change. So this bill was intended to bring Florida as the 29th state and take it out of the category of states that were still following the 90-year-old Pride standard. And that standard was followed in 9 states before this bill passed. So we were a distinct minority. What Daubert does, it says if you want to have an expert testify, it has to be based on facts or data, reliable principles and methods, and the expert has to show that he has applied those principles and methods reliably to the facts of the case. And the trial judge is empowered with vetting this before the jury gets to hear it. So if there's a challenge to the expert's testimony, you'd have a hearing where you would determine the validity of the science before you let it go to the jury. So it's intended to keep junk science from getting in front of juries where a lot of mischief can occur. And,
would this apply to the Florida Department of Environmental Protection? All of their
it would apply in the courts of Florida. Florida Administrative Code proceedings don't necessarily adhere to the rules of evidence, but in circuit and county courts it would apply. There's expert testimony.
Well, if we could outlaw junk science in the environmental arena, man, that'd be great.
Well, if it gets in a litigation context in the circuit court, it would be applicable. If they're going to have experts.
You have to bring a case against it.
Well, a lot of times environmental issues end up in court. Writs of certiorari or other means, so they couldn't get there. But this is an improvement. It's not like we made something up, by the way. This bill is an easy bill for me to run. I'm familiar with health standards. In the federal courts, I've already been under Daubert, and I've worked with Fry in state court. And so we didn't have to create something new or novel. We just took the exact language out of the federal rules of evidence, which was passed to implement the Daubert standard, and we took that and made that our bill. So it's not something we're gambling with, and we know what the results are in 28 other states plus the federal system. So I'm really happy this bill made it through finally, and I don't have to do it again. And some of the members actually said in debate, if I vote for this bill, does that mean I never have to hear you present it again? Yeah, I'm in. Because I'm like 3 years in a row, they've heard it all, and they don't want to hear it anymore. Yeah, wear it down. Now, the next 2 items are resolutions, not bills. There's no limit on the number of resolutions you can file. This one happened to be drafted by another member named Clay Ford, a really great gentleman who tragically passed away early in session. And so leadership came to me and asked me if I would take this and finish it for Clay, and I was honored he could do that. And so it was passed by the House. And it recognizes March 30, 2013 as Welcome Home Vietnam Veterans Day. which was the 40th anniversary of the end of U.S. involvement in that war. Do we have any Vietnam veterans in the room? Thank you for your service. Appreciate it. These gentlemen, I didn't see any ladies raise their hands, but the ladies and gentlemen that served in the Vietnam War were not treated with the proper respect by our country at the time because the war policy was unpopular in some quarters, and some of those opponents of the war policy were very vocal and vicious in their attacks on our service members coming back. So we wanted to try to do something for them. This was Clay's effort at recognizing them. And the next one, Andy, is the one that I drafted.
Larry,
Hit the button.
Larry held you chaired that ceremony
Right.
on May 18th over here at One Park.
And this resolution that I sponsored, this is one that I worked on and got through. And again, resolutions are not usually controversial, but this was recognizing the service of our Vietnam veterans and saying it's time to do something for them in special recognition of their service because they weren't given that 40 years ago when they came home. So we did have a welcome home parade, a group of volunteers in the community here, banded together, created a committee. I was in session, I was hip deep and all that. I couldn't really do much on that, but I did agree to be the master of ceremonies when session was over. And we helped it with it. But there was a welcome home parade to various, and I had one Vietnam veteran who I don't know from any other way. He wrote me an email and just said that when the trailer that they were riding on turned and went on the main street, he said there were 14 Vietnam veterans on that trailer who weren't able to walk in the parade they were riding. He said when that trailer turned the corner and we could see people on the sidewalks and hear them say thank you and welcome home, there wasn't a dry eye on the trailer. The veterans were pouring out their emotions on that. This was in them for 40 years, and we brought it out. And then we had a wonderful ceremony with Captain Plum, the former POW, and that really brought some closure to a lot of the vets that were there, I think. Don't you think, Andy?
Yeah.
Oh, it was an
He was
amazing
wonderful.
day.
He spent 2,100 days in an 8x8 cell.
Mm-hmm.
He shared that experience.
We were hoping that what we did would be replicated around the state and the country. This resolution went out, and Vance, thank you for videotaping that and put it on. You put it on the website, right?
Yeah, it's on Fiscal Rangers Florida YouTube account.
And
Where is it? Where is it?
And also on the
It is
DVR
worth watching. You will laugh and you will cry.
Oh,
DVR2013.org, I think, is the committee's website, and I think it was put there too.
Did they? Okay.
I hope if it's not there, Vance, maybe you could check on that and get it there too, because it's something we should share with everybody if we can. Okay, let's see what we have. I want to just give you now, we've done really good on time. I haven't taken questions yet, and I'm happy to do that, but this is my last slide pretty much. Just wanted to let you know what the go forward is on the calendar. The speaker, the committee assignments, well, first of all, the committee structure is always up to the speaker in the House and the President of the Senate. There's nothing etched in stone about what the committees are going to be, or how many members are going to be on them, or who serves on them, or who chairs them. Speaker Weatherford put me on 5 committees for this past session, and I was the chairman of the Civil Justice Subcommittee. I was really grateful for that opportunity to chair a committee. There's a lot of extra responsibility because all the bills that get referred to that committee, you're the one that decides do you hear the bill or not. And it's a lot of responsibility. I really appreciate the speaker putting me there. So the speaker's going to get our inputs on which committees we want to serve on for the next year. And then we're going to be given those assignments, I'm thinking probably in August. We start our first committee week in September. It's 1 week a month for the rest of the year. So September, October, November, December. We go to Tallahassee, the committees meet. We start out with PowerPoints about what's going on in the state, maybe the effects of what we passed this year or maybe even last year, see where the progress is. And then we start hearing bills that are referred to those committees and get them ready for the session, which begins in March. So we have 2 committee weeks in January and 3 weeks in February, and then we start the session in 60 days, 20 weeks long. And then we're over, and we're back here doing this again at that point. So that's the process going forward. And last slide, questions? Dave?
Larry, we've already had one candidate for District 31, and it's too bad we can't clone you, but we know that we can. Would you be interested in putting together some vetting questions that we can assure that whatever candidate we would decide to support in District 31 would have a like mind with you?
Well, thank you, Dave. That's a high compliment, better than that question. But the District 31 race, I don't get to vote in that race. I live in District 32. So the voters of District 31 are going to have to really figure out who they want for District 31. And I don't think I should be taking a role in that because...
No, I wouldn't expect you to back or support
Okay.
someone. All I'm talking about are questions that we could ask that we would know where a person stands in relation to the issues that you brought up today.
Well, I could probably provide you the general input on that. I don't want to even inject myself into their race because I want the candidates to work it their own way and figure out their own way. Just like I did. I mean, that's the benefit of a campaign. Jim did it with the school board, and it's a gauntlet that you have to go through. And I'm happy to give the group, general advice on that. I mean, I've made it clear, for example, that, I would like to see their positions on, for example, the North Lake County Hospital District. I worked hard on that a year ago. I'm sorry?
We already have one that failed that question.
Again, I just say, those are lots of things you have to think about. What's important to you in the District 31 race, So, I think you all can do it without me, but if you wanted to get my input, I'd be happy to provide it just in a general sense. I just want to steer clear of that race because I don't have a vote in it.
Right.
And whoever wins it is going to be my colleague, and I'm going to work with that person for the betterment of Lake County on the delegation. So I'm not trying to pick a winner or a loser in that race in the primary, as long as the people are qualified, to run. And I think they are at this point. I don't know if there's any Democrats running, but I think there's 4 Republicans so far. Yes, sir.
I just read today that on July 1st, the state passed a bill to allow the gasoline companies not to put ethanol in gas in Florida.
Governor Scott signed it.
Now, that repealer bill was passed by the Florida House and the Florida Senate and signed by the governor, and it takes out of the Florida statutes the ethanol mandate, if you will. It doesn't change a whole lot because there's a federal mandate that overlays it, but it gets us out from under that and all that administrative costs associated with having it at the state level. It's gone now. It's a step in the right direction. But we shouldn't be trying to create an artificial market for a product. That's the job of the private sector to do through consumer choices. So if there's a demand for ethanol, the energy companies will provide it and charge you for it, and you can buy it all you want. But for the government to say we have to force it into the economy and create winners and losers in the economy by picking products and giving directives on how they're going to be handled and all that, that's just too much government intervention in the economy. So I supported the repeal. I voted for it.
But what good does this bill do?
Well, it just gets the state of Florida out of that business. I mean, Congress is going to have to address the federal laws. But this is certainly a statement by the legislature in Florida and the governor that we don't think we should have this type of mandate. So
I stopped by Paris Oil and bought some ethanol-free gas, and I asked her what that was going to mean to them. And she said it depends on the oil companies, whether they're going to produce fuel without ethanol. That because that law passed doesn't mean that they have to. And if they're preparing fuel in Georgia to go other places that you have to have ethanol, you're going to continue to get ethanol in your fuel.
yeah, there's actually a conflict in the scientific evidence about the benefits of it. Some people don't find it to be beneficial to fuel economy or to the longevity of an engine. So,
Larry, what was the outcome of the healthcare exchanges and the Medicaid expansion?
Florida had, the ultimate result was the status quo. Just the way it was before session, it's still the way it is now. The 3 players, which is the House, the Senate, and the governor, had 3 different approaches to it. The governor, of course, supported taking the Medicaid expansion as the federal government offered it. The Senate decided to, and they did pass a bill that would have said, we'll take the money, but we would like to get a waiver from the exact requirements and instead use it for funding private insurance for the same classes of people. The House took a much different approach. It said we're not going to take the federal Medicaid expansion the way it's offered at all. We're just not going to take it, and we're going to provide an alternative program called the Florida Healthy Choices Program that addresses a very small segment of the overall population intended to benefit from Medicaid expansion that was most in need, if you will. But we were not going to go with that massive new population of childless adults that the Medicaid expansion would cover. Medicaid's program is never intended to cover childless adults who are able-bodied. It is intended to be a safety net for the elderly, the infirm, children primarily. And so the House just decided not to do that. And I supported not doing anything to expand Medicaid because I think it's fiscally irresponsible to say we're going to take $51 billion at least, and I don't believe it would just be that much. It would cost a lot more, because everything costs a lot more than the federal government does, more than they estimated. Look at the estimates that came out when Medicare was passed, or when Medicaid was passed. The current program in Medicaid right now is about 30% of our budget. And if you go back about 10 or 12 years, it was 18% of our budget. So the exponential growth of the program without the expansion has been difficult for us because it crowds out our other priorities. We have to spend less on education, public safety, the environment, whatever your heart's desire is on state spending. There's probably less of it now because we're spending more on Medicaid as it's currently constituted. And it's not shown to produce better health outcomes in most cases, and a lot of doctors won't even accept it. So there's a whole host of problems with it, not to mention the fact that when you get a business proposal from a person who is, or say in this case it's a government, but as a regular business person, somebody came to you and said, I've got a business proposition for you. Let's go into business, I'll provide the money, and you do all the work, and you take all the risk. And by the way, my financial statement shows that I'm bankrupt and that I'm headed towards a disaster. So let's do business together. I mean, why would you do that if you're an individual? Well, it's no different right now with the state of Florida and the federal government. I think when you have 16 going on $17 trillion in accumulated public debt, federal deficits for as long as the eye can see in excess of $1 trillion, to say that you're going to take on a partnership arrangement with that government entity and still maintain your principles of fiscal responsibility, you can't do it. So that's why the House just said no. And I think that's going to stand. That's the position that we took is going to stand.
Thank you, Larry.
This isn't a question, but months ago when Bill Mathias came in here, he said that from time to time he would come to us and ask for our help. And when I saw some of those things up there that didn't pass for you, the only one that I was aware of was the American law. And I would suggest and hope that you would come to us and tell us, I'm working on this, and I need your help, and let us start telling everybody we know, and making phone calls and stuff, putting it on our Facebook, whatever we do, so that we can try to help get the word out for you, because maybe some people could call their legislators. I mean, you're mine, but a lot of people in this room, you're not.
I appreciate that, and that's been effective. And it's a question of timing, though. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I just think you have to get the bill at least postured for success. And sometimes it's a non-starter, and so I don't want to use up your bandwidth on something that's a non-starter. We want to use you when we know you can make the difference, because that's the most effective use of your energy. I want to also mention, since you got me thinking about that, I think these citizen watchdog folks like Vance and Rick and Jim Krakowski, and there's probably others, and Marilyn Boehner started out that way with the hospital district years back before she actually got on board. But citizen activists going to meetings, getting aware of what's going on, and then sharing information with groups like this is a wonderful thing. I mean, it's how things can happen, I believe. I personally think that, for example, Marilyn Boehner, when she started out, was just a citizen activist, that was a catalytic involvement that created more public awareness of a problem that ended up getting solved by the legislature. Vance has told me about some things when I was on the school board that have proven to be correct, and we've tried to address those. By the way, Vance, House Bill 657, that school calendar bill, the other half of that bill was that language you and I discussed that I put in there, and I was actually going to get that on another bill. But when the Democrats, on the third to the last day of session, started requiring that every bill be read in its entirety, they did that right before that bill was up on the floor. And once that happened, everything went off track, and that bill died. So we can try to get that. It had to do with clarifying the language in statute about school district auditor powers. It's kind of real limited right now the way it's worded, even though in practice they're doing full audits. So I tried to make the language reflect the reality in that bill. And that was half of the 657 that you mentioned earlier, the school calendar bill. So Vance had brought that to my attention. I knew about it from my school board days, but it got off my radar. And Vance came to me a year ago and said, hey, are you going to do anything about that ambiguous language? And I said, thanks for reminding me. I did want to do something about that. And I had it in the bill, and it was almost postured for success, but that procedural problem for Democrats caused it to go off track. And we'll try again next year on that.
Yeah, I think it was 2013 elections. It looks like we've relaxed the restrictions on early voting, more days if
Yes.
citizens want, and then also more additional venues.
Yes.
The question is in the process for debate and discovery on those kind of things. Is voting fraud brought up? Is there data to support one position or another? Like, yeah, this won't introduce voting fraud, or we don't even have any information to back it one way or the other? How does that figure in on these types of modifications?
Well, that particular subject of increasing the number of early voting days is in the discussion of the supervisors of elections who are elected in most counties. So I don't think it does anything to increase the risk of voter fraud.
Okay, the reason I asked is I thought when I was studying this more a year or two ago that there was a correlation, higher correlation with the early voting voter fraud as opposed to non-early voting voter fraud. And if you have more days and more venues for early voting, and that's true, then statistically you're going to have a little bit more voting fraud.
Opportunities for mischief.
Yeah, more opportunities for very well. But on the other hand, if those numbers are so small and they're negligible, you can negate them and say, yeah, we realize that could happen, but they're so small, we're not even going to worry about it. Or people don't even bring up the possibility of that issue. Maybe there's not enough data out there to contribute to the discussion. That's kind of my question.
I don't have a specific answer for you. I think the anti-fraud provisions have to do with registering voters correctly and making sure that when they identify themselves at a voting precinct that the identification is produced and the person's signature is correlated with the one on file. And those types of things are done. I was a poll watcher for the Romney campaign in November of 2012, and I thought the procedures being followed locally were sound.
One of the examples, I think, are actually people going to rest homes, get them to sign up and then turning those in. There's a few other examples of that, but if that data is not even on the floor, or legislators aren't even aware of any data, are you aware of any attempts to gather and harvest that kind of data to see if there is a problem? Because some people, of course, claim no, there isn't, or there is. Is there any data that you have for?
Well, I don't think in passing this bill we were talking about that we increase the risk of fraud by what we did. I mean, whether there's other avenues of fraudulent registration going on, I mean, I think the federal motor voter bill is something that I would like to see Congress take a look at because, to me, not requiring critical citizenship for people to vote is a huge gaping hole in the system. You need to be a citizen if you're going to vote. I mean, it's just a no-brainer. But yet the federal motor registration law doesn't allow states to require critical citizenship to register that way. I just don't agree with that. That's a federal issue. It's normal.
It seems to me that there is a good bit of voter fraud, but I don't really see a lot of convictions. Is there some way we can put more teeth into that area so that whenever people are guilty, that they're punished and made an example of? There's a lot of fraud that just isn't being pursued or prosecuted.
I have to look into that. I mean, I don't have that evidence brought to me. I mean, in a forum like this, someone might comment on it, but no one has come to us and said, here's a proof of fraud, what can we do about it? We have an elections committee that was formed by the speaker, and I know they would have their antennae up if there were problems like that. We would have addressed them if we thought there was anecdotal evidence of that.
Part of the problem is it's by the very nature, as you know, as an attorney, that fraud is not done in bright daylight. It's done in the shadows, and so you have to be vigilant to find the snail's trail, as they say, to know that it has been there. And I mean, the example of the IRS sending $41 million in electronic direct deposits to one address in Atlanta is an example of the incompetence of government to detect what should be on anybody's book obvious fraud. I mean, it was just, you know, so open and obvious, you gotta go, come on, you know, if you couldn't detect this at the time, where's the U.S. Postal Service delivering the 10% of the physical checks, saying you're getting 200 checks a month here at one address, they're all tax returns. The same thing, I think, exists in the voting fraud area. This is where True to Vote in Texas has the potential for being an effective method for identifying areas, but we can't go to the legislature with supposition. You're going to have to go with actual facts. And this is where I think private groups like True to Vote, if it ever gets its IRS 501c4 designation, and other groups are going to have to find the fraud and then present it. Otherwise, they're going to say you're talking about a non-issue.
You won't find it until it's investigated, though.
Well,
It's not there for
yeah,
you to look for.
right.
Well, I think True to Vote does a good job.
Right. That's what we got to do here locally.
I've often said I wish I could pass a bill that turned dishonest people into honest people, because all across all lines of government and all lines of business, everything, there's going to be some people that are going to violate integrity and try to get away with something. It's unfortunate. I mean, look at the Medicaid programs. I think there's about $1 billion in fraud embedded in that right now. And
Well, when you have people like the NSA director lying to Congress and then later going on a talk show saying, well, I used the least untruthful true statement or some variant of that, and now says, well, I just merely forgot about the Patriot Act, that was a letter of apology to Congress. This is the standard that we have in government. So pass your law.
And there are a lot of problems with credibility now, starting, well, we go back really far, but I think the most recent thing for me is Benghazi, and the lack of accountability and escalation for the death of 4 Americans there, followed by the IRS scandal, followed by the NSA scandal. Professor Juris is in there too, somewhere. And you just have one thing after the next, and pretty soon no one believes anything the government is saying, and that's when there's an inability to govern effectively. And that's kind of where we are now at the federal level.
It's not a problem, other than the fact Nancy Pelosi wants to get 4th of July and celebrate the first year of Obamacare.
Larry, I'm kind of looking ahead, and I know that one of the burning issues that has bubbled up recently in Lake County has been the Common Core implementation in our public school system. And it's one of those things, I know the train has left the station, but I also know that the more people learn about the Common Core standards being implemented in schools, the more opposition people have to it. And I was wondering if, looking at this next legislative session, if there was something that you could do that would unburden, our school board from those standards.
Well, I have a lot of work to do on this. This is an issue that came up about week 7 of the session. We started getting emails and calls about it, but we were hip deep in what we were working on at that time, and there's no way we could work on that because the bill filing deadline is long past, and it would take a lot of time to work on a bill that addresses Common Core. So I'm not in any hurry right now because I have all those committee weeks ahead of me, a lot of opportunity to educate myself on it. My legislative aide is going to put together a notebook. I want the actual source materials. I mean, I've gotten lots of forwards of blogs and articles and Q&As from government and just all different types of documents that are collateral information, but I want to get the actual source documents, starting with the statutes, the regulations, trace it on down, see what it's all about, and find out what some of the concerns are that are actually validated by my review of the source materials. Because I just don't want to believe everything that I've read about it on either side without checking it. That's just the way I am. I try to go to source materials. Someone says, well, there's a problem with the statute, then I want to see the statute. I don't want to see the article written about the statute. I'll look at that too, but I want to see the source material. So that's my research project over the next few months. And I want to also reach out to other people that know more about this than me. And find out more about it, because it is a situation where the legislature passed it in 2010. That's before I got elected. It was already in law, and we're in the 3rd year of implementation. And So if we were to say, let's just repeal it, say everybody said, let's repeal it, we all could do that. You have to have something to replace it. What are you going to do? You can't just repeal it and have nothing to replace it with. So I want to see, this is a very complicated issue because it's midstream and the concerns are now arising 3 years after it was passed reform. And so it's something that has to be thought about very carefully. And I want to reach out to other people that know more about it than I do and find out from them.
Well, one of the problems is going to be the entanglement of the federal incentives to follow this. This was the race to the top is the replacement to No Child Left Behind. So the states that were running into trouble, which most were, with No Child Left Behind, have the option of going and getting a waiver for No Child Left Behind if they went for race to the top. And of course, the carrot of enormous amounts of federal money were dangled, and Common Core was hidden in the paperwork. Coercion.
Well, I'll give you an example of my hesitancy to really think I have an answer right now, because I don't. But, for example, I heard in one of the presentations, I don't think it was the one that was here last week, but somewhere along the way, someone said, or maybe I read, that under Common Core you can't teach American history, or you can't teach about the founding documents. Well, I know we have a statute that I've seen in black and white, it's still on the books, it's still law, that says they have to teach about the founding documents. Well, it's in law though, I've read it, I've seen it. So that's why someone says, well, we can't teach about the founding documents anymore, they're taking away all that in Common Core. And I know that there's a black and white statute that says we do teach that and we have to teach that. I have to reconcile that. I can't just say, well, I'm giving up on Common Core right now because someone said we can't do something when I know we have to do it. So I want to see how they fit together and find out more about that. I'm not willing to adopt any curriculum that says we're not going to teach fundamental values in our history. But I'm not willing to say that because I heard someone say that we can't do it, that we really can't do it when I know there's a law that says we have to do it. So that's where I'm at with it. I'm getting bombarded with information in email forwards and articles and blog postings, and I wonder, well, I want to separate the fact from the hyperbole that might be stirred by someone who got carried away with their advocacy in perhaps a good way, but now sometimes these things take on a life of their own, and we've got to pull back and look at what the facts are. And I'm not for a federally mandated one-size-fits-all cram down on the states at all. But I want to see what the actual deal is on this and find out what we can do to make it better if we have to. Or if we're going to replace it, what are we going to replace it with? That's a very valid question, and I don't have an answer to that. But I do think reading, writing, and arithmetic ought to be part of it, and I'm troubled that we're going to say we don't teach cursive writing anymore.
Oh, well, so that Zimmerman trial, that is not a good thing to do.
So anyway, this young lady's been waiting patiently.
I just wanted to ask you one more thing about in Pasco County, I think there were, the vote was like, the turnout was like 125% or something like that of the registered voters. That came out in the paper. And as far as I know, nobody ever did one thing about it. Now, whose responsibility would it be to look into that? Because that was the figures that were recorded. I don't remember the exact figure, but it was over 100%.
So in other words, you're saying to me that, let's just say hypothetically, in Polk County there's 100,000 voters. I don't know what the number is.
And 115,000 voted or something like that.
And this is fact. This is not somebody
Well,
blogging.
like I'm saying, it was in the paper.
Larry, I have an explanation for that. They counted the number of pages, but you have two sides to a ballot, and so they counted each side, and that's how they came up with that number versus the number of...
That was inaccurate?
Yes. See, that's...
Well, see, they never came out and said that.
They had the local.
They never came out and took that back. So I never heard
They
that.
come out with another ballot, so they counted.
Let's just say we're exact. I mean, here's the thing. I know we are well represented around the state. We have good legislators around the state. I have a hard time believing that, let's say, Senator Stargell and Representative McKeel from Polk County, if if you said to me, you believe it's a fact that 115,000 voted and it was 100,000 registered, and there's no debate about this, it's just those are the raw numbers, and we have proof that they wouldn't come to the legislature and try to address that.
Yeah.
It wouldn't come to me, someone wouldn't copy the article and send it to me, and I could read it and say to them, well, did this really happen in your county? I mean, if it happened in Lake County and it was given as a fact to me, it wouldn't be something I said, well, I don't have time for that, I'll just move on to something else, and we won't even mention it. It won't, you know, sometimes things get passed around that just are not grounded in fact, and they take on a life of their own, and before you know it, you all have seen this experiment when they do with children, they tell something on one side of the classroom, and they say, whisper it to your friend, and it's completely different on the other end. So it's important that you check source materials and be fact-driven on it, and data-driven, like that expert witness bill. That's why we did it. You know, we like facts or data, principles and methods, and reliable application in our court system.
Well, this got passed around, because I heard it from several sources. So, I mean, and I never heard a retraction.
Did you all see that commercial on TV where the person's like, where did you learn that? I read it on the internet.
Yeah.
It must be true.
The French guy.
Yeah, this is.
I got it from Fiscal Rangers. That's what I got.
That's the problem we face. In other words, the information age is wonderful.
Half of it's true.
We have instant access to information, but that means we also have instant access to misinformation. And sorting out the wheat from the chaff, so to speak, is a very important task. And so it takes time and effort and resources. And I'm in a place right now coming off session in early May and doing 14 town hall meetings and a newsletter and trying to, you know, get back to work as an attorney. That I just couldn't stop doing everything like that just to work on Common Core when I know it's not an issue until March of 2014. And I can file a bill as late as noon on the first day of session and still have a chance to get that bill heard. So it's a matter of priorities, and I want to do my due diligence, and I've already talked to my legislative aide about the research that I want compiled for my review. And then as I get into it, I'll start learning more, and I'll know what questions to ask and who to take them to, and figure out what solution. There might be somebody else, because I remember I told you about the specialty areas of committees, and I sit on 4 committees drawing on my lawyer experience and 1 on my education experience as a school board member. So I'm not an education policy heavyweight in the legislature compared to some other people who share those committees and have served on multiple ones like that. Maybe they're working on this already, and when we get there, we'll have a bill. So there's a lot of things I've got to check into here before I figure out, because you can only work on so much if you have 6 bill slots and limited time. You can't say, well, you're going to just do everything at all times and do everything in a mediocre way. So you got to pick your battles. So for me, it's self-education. That's where I'm at with it. And that's why I went to the forum for 2 hours last week while Jim was up here with others.
2.5 hours.
Did it go 2.5 hours? I had to leave at 9:07. I just said I have to get home. So my wife was expecting me before that, and I didn't want to drag it out any more than that. But anyway,
How long do you want to drag Mary around?
Are we finished?
I was going to make one comment, basically. Of all things, it was the expert testimony bill, the Pride Standards Being Replaced with Robert.
Yes.
I thought that was a pretty good example of the way federalism is supposed to work with states and laboratories. And just a thought, whenever something like that comes up, it might be worthwhile when announcing this in the right environments to teach people, in this case, about state laboratories and federalism. This is a good example of the way the country was designed, and we wanted to work not just always top-down federal government. So just a thought, whenever there's an opportunity to teach something like that about our government, I've had to relearn, if I can remember from decades ago, the general population seems to be like I am and was, not having all this at the forefront of their brain to apply to all these debates and things they hear, and that would have been a good opportunity to put everything up to when that bill was discussed and why we're doing this. That's just a comment.
Yeah, it was purely a state decision to do it or not do it. You know, 28 states already did it. We came to 29 states. We didn't have to do it. There's no mandate. There's no funding. It's just a purely voluntary decision to take a good policy and apply it in Florida. And that's, you're right. I mean, that's the benefit of being a state. You can do these things, and that's, we need to preserve that right going forward against the encroachment of the federal government. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity.